This is going to be a little bit difficult because some of these questions can be triggering or very hard for some people to listen to. I just want to share with you those questions that I had and what I found and how I ended up deconstructing. Hi guys, I want to thank to all the people that watched my previous video where I was sharing about my deconstruction process. The people that watched the video in its entirety, that means a lot to me that you took the time and you care. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that I received many private messages with people just being very loving. There are some people that messaged me and they were saying that my life with Christ was never real, that I never had a true relationship with Christ, or that I didn't know God well. And I just want to ask you, how do you know that? I mean, think about it. Would you like someone judging your life that way? Would you like someone judging your relationship with Christ or with anyone else in general? And someone to say that your relationship to someone is the opposite of what you know it is. All I'm saying is, I don't think you want to go there. I don't think that's a healthy way to approach people that believe something different than you do. Other than that, I'm grateful for the positive responses. Some people shared with me that they don't feel comfortable letting other people know that they're not Christian anymore, or that they're starting this deconstruction process. And I totally understand that. I don't think it's easy to come out and tell everyone that is around you that you don't believe the same things that they do. It's not an easy process, but it's going to be okay. Don't be afraid to be honest. At the end, even the Bible says that the truth will set us free. I got many questions too. Some were not beneficial at all, and they were more judgmental than anything else. But some questions were very constructive, and I think it's important for me to address those things. What people asked me the most was, what were some of those specific questions that you had that led you to your deconstruction? So that's what I'm going to be sharing about today. Before I start going through the questions, I just want to let you know that my intention behind this video is for my and your greatest good. This is going to be a little bit difficult because some of these questions can be triggering or very hard for some people to listen to. But all I'm going to ask you is to actually listen to the questions that I had, listen to some of the answers that I got. If you find some of these questions interesting and there's something you want to say, you're more than welcome to say it, as long as your intention is not to win an argument. Because when that's the intention, our brains kind of like just shut down, kind of like we stop actually digesting information, but we just are like in a defensive mode. And that's not the point of this. I am not trying to convince anyone of anything. I just want to share with you those questions that I had and what I found and how I ended up deconstructing. As long as your intention is driven by love and our intention is to build up each other, feel free to comment on this video, or wherever you see this video, feel free to comment and you can ask any more questions. Or if I say something and you think differently, you're more than welcome to let me know your thoughts. So one of the questions that I always struggle with, and I remember since I was little, always like having that thought, and I'm pretty sure some of you have thought about this before, is the question of evil. Like, why does evil exist? I remember I would be like, why are there bad things in this world? And I am not talking about me like losing the keys to my house, or like my baby threw up on my dress, or things like that. When you think of a little girl that is subject to sex trafficking, those are the kind of evil things that I never understood. How can God see this happening and being okay with letting it happen? Because he has a reason for it, because there is a plan, but there's nothing that to me sounded like a reason good enough to allow a little 2-year-old girl to be sexually abused by a family or a friend or something. For me, there was no good reason. And I know this is not a thought that only I had. there's actually something called the Epicurus trilemma that it talks exactly about that. So number one is, if God is not able to prevent evil, then he is not all-powerful. Number two, if God is not willing to prevent evil, then he's not all good. And then finally, we come to the question of, if God is able to and he's willing to prevent evil, why does evil exist? And like the most popular answer I found was that we live in an imperfect world full of sin, and God has a plan, and we only have to resist this world. We only have to go through this awful season so that one day we're going to be with God in a perfect world. And that is still not a good enough reason for me to see why God would allow something so awful. Things like rape or genocide, those kind of things, I still don't see the need for it. It is still a little bit confusing why God, so loving and kind and full of good, would allow just evil to exist in general. We can go back as far as Satan and be like, okay, well, Satan started this whole thing. Like, we fell into the trap of sin, and it was because of Satan. Well, God is like all-knowing, and he knew that Satan was going to start this whole thing. Like, why create Satan there? If he couldn't stop it, then it would mean that he's not all-powerful. Like, if he couldn't stop Satan from, or anyone from finding out about evil, then he's not all-powerful then. It's something that I started wondering about. It was always in the back of my head, like there was never a good explanation for me. And as I started researching more about the Epicurus dilemma and about hell, then I ran into some information that was showing how the Bible has errors in it. Like, there was people manipulating the text and everything for us to have the Bible that we have today. There are these manuscripts like the Sumerian Pentateuch and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic texts. That's a difficult word. There are certain words that are different to each other, and there are some grammatical mistakes that would make these manuscripts not match each other perfectly. So it can't be the perfect word of God if it is 99% accurate. And it makes me wonder, like, why wouldn't God, who is all-powerful, all-knowing, preserve the book that is going to reveal us his plans and who he is? Why wouldn't he preserve it perfectly? Because when he's asking for faith without seeing, and we have to believe, okay, and then we have this book, but it's 99% accurate. That made it for me a little harder to keep on trusting. I can use it, and I do believe that the Bible has a lot of wisdom and there are good things to it, but I don't think that is a book that will rule my life. I also think that experience can change what a person believes. So if this is something that you are into and that works for you, more power to you. But once again, these are just the questions that I had and what led me to deconstruction. I tell you, I am not claiming that I know it all. It's just information that I got, is like a research that I did on my own. So I do know a little bit more. I'm not saying that I know it all. From what I've learned, Hebrew was also a dead language for about 200 years, if I'm right. When we brought that language back to life, there are many things that we're missing now from that language. There are some metaphors or similes that there was no way we can know what they meant back then, because there's no one alive who can tell us what that means. Like, to give you a really bad example, but it's just like a simple example I can think of right now, the phrase nailed it. Say nailed it. So say that English becomes a dead language right now, and 200 years from now, people bring this language back to life and they understand English words and everything. But then there was this saying that people used to say, nailed it, and people are gonna be like, oh yeah, nailed it, because when people would have great ideas, they would like nail it to a wall. Or, I don't know, it's a really bad example, but it's just so that you understand what I mean. There are phrases that we say that we understand because we're part of the culture, but that they could get lost in time if the language dies. Another thing that always hit me a lot was the way that seems like if God changes his mind about morality, and that is totally okay with like us, like humans, that we would change our minds about morality. That makes sense. Like we're people with fails, and we grow and we mature, and like we learn new things, and so our sense of morality changes and improves. But when I think about God, I would think that God should know it all since the beginning. He should know what's good, what's right, what's wrong, as a definite. But when I look at the Bible, it seems like he started changing the way he would see right and wrong. Even when you see the difference in God in the Old Testament versus the one in the New Testament, or like the laws in Leviticus versus the laws in Deuteronomy. And I understand from like the Old Testament to the New Testament that God created a new covenant with us because of Jesus, and that things are different now, that the old laws are abolished because of the new covenant. But to me, that doesn't dismiss the fact that God previously was okay with things like genocide or slavery. Those are two big ones. And one of the explanations that I've heard from people are think of humanity as a child and God as a father, and then there's some things that we couldn't understand and rules that we couldn't follow back then. So God had to be patient and start with just certain rules, and then slowly, progressively changing that. But I think of me and Rio, and yeah, if it comes to something like burping at the table, I totally understand. I'm like, well, he's just a little kid. But when it comes to morals, like I am not going to cause suffering on someone else, that's something that I've been teaching him since he was a newborn. That if he was little and he would scratch another kid, even if it was by accident, I would say like, no, we don't do that. We have to be kind. We have to be nice to each other. If now that he's 2, like he would hit another kid, that is still wrong. Even though he's little, I'm going to teach him that is not okay. And I am not going to be okay with you hurting someone else. And that's what I mean, that for me was hard to accept that God would be okay with his people making other people suffer back then. Even if that's the way things were back then, if that's what the culture was like back then. But under my understanding, God shouldn't be defined by culture, and big things like slavery should be something that he should have said since the beginning, this is not okay. And there was no need for him to wait until we would be mature enough to understand that slavery is not okay. Finally, another thing that I was telling you about in the other video was when I learned about denominations. I started looking more into it and realizing that there is like minimum 21,000 Christian denominations. And that's like the small number. I think like there was some research that said that there were about 40,000 something denominations. And so when I look at that and realize that all of these people claim to be holding the truth, but they have different perspectives and views on the Bible and the way that we relate to God and Jesus, that brings me back to what I shared at the end of my other video, that I think somehow we all can hold some of that truth. And when I mean truth, I mean the truth about God and who he is. But I don't think anyone has the whole vision of who God is and how it relates to us. So let me know what you think. Feel free to post your comments, your thoughts. If there are different answers that you have to some of the questions that I shared, please feel free to share them. Just keep in mind what I said at the beginning of my video. Try do it based on love and trying to build up each other, and not with the intention of winning an argument. Thank you so much to the people that subscribe to my channel. I can't believe it. I actually didn't know that anyone was going to subscribe, so I really appreciate it. To me, it means that you care enough about my journey and that you want to know more, and that means the world to me. So thank you so much to the people that subscribe. And let me know also if this was somehow beneficial to you. And if you have any other questions, I'm an open book. So once again, thank you for your time and have a great 2020.